For the past 2 months or so, this show has been focusing quite a bit on the effect that the current pandemic has had on the United States. But the rest of the world is suffering as well, some communities far more than others. And joining us now to talk about how this particular emergency is interacting with another, the international refugee emergency that we've been dealing with internationally for some time now. Very excited to have back on the show journalist and host of the Course Correction podcast, Nellifer Hedayat. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, John.
Very glad to have you here. We spoke several months ago when your podcast, Course Correction, at that point was relatively new, but that's not the only show that you've been working on recently, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we've all had to adjust to the way that the coronavirus has changed all of our industries, and certainly me being in the media and journalism industry, it's just meant that almost everything is online. So I have developed a new show called Dear World Live that we put out every Tuesday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and it's a real response to the way that the Doha debates ethos plays out in this modern day where coronavirus impacts and permeates every level of all of our lives. So it's a direct response to the coronavirus pandemic.
And one of the things you've been talking about recently on the show is how it's affecting different refugee populations. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so each week we get together and we decide on a specific subject matter. We've already done one on the world's largest lockdown, which is in India. That was our first show. But the one that really is close to my heart, because I'm an Afghan refugee. So I was born in Kabul. I was a refugee for a little while, and then I settled here in London in the United Kingdom, is the story of what's happening to one of the world's arguably most vulnerable populations, the 25 million people in the world who are stateless, who are refugees. And we had on the show the United Nations High Commissioner, Filippo Grandi, who talked to me about the new Trump immigration ban. I mean, I don't know which one we're on at this point. It could be the 10th or the 12th. There we go. But it was really interesting to hear from him because he made two really interesting points that I don't know I agree with, but I was glad to hear. And I don't know if you've got the clip, but it was really interesting.
So why don't we play a little bit of that and then you can tell us a bit more about it.
So you in fact agree with President Donald Trump and the limitation he's placed?
Well, I don't know. These are very political debates. And he was talking about, I think, he was talking about immigration as a whole, not specifically about refugees. My message to the US, to any country would be, let not the right to asylum, the possibility of refugees of crossing borders and seeking protection, refuge from persecution, from war, let this not become a victim of the coronavirus as well.
Okay, so you said that there were some disagreements you had, so tell us about that.
He completely understood, he said, the ban that President Trump wants to put into place. He said that he understands why a nation would want to restrict this kind of migration, certainly with refugees, and that he hopes that in the end, the refugees don't come worse off. But it's strange to me, it feels a little incongruous, putting it in the context of the fact that Mr. Trump has a history of banning different types of migration, certainly when it comes to Muslim migrants. And to hear someone in his position talk in such an understanding way about refugees and migration to the US, it just feels like, well, you might put the line here, but where would the right, where would the libertarian, where would the sort of far right draw that line? So it was interesting to me that he agreed with Mr. Trump, and then kind of went on to say, but let's hope that something better comes out of this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. That's the issue when you make accommodations with these extremist governments. So first of all, I don't think that Donald Trump that the pandemic is at all influencing this. It's a continuation of a xenophobic foreign policy that's been in place since before he was president. It was one of the main things that he ran on was a Muslim ban. It's obviously opportunistic that he's trying to ram it through, like a lot of other policies that have nothing to do with the coronavirus that he's been pushing through in recent days. And also, I mean, look, we sort of jokingly said it's like the 12th, anti-immigration move that he's made. That's one of the only things that means that this most recent change isn't as bad as it could have been, is that there's not that much immigration left to restrict at this point.
Here's the the danger, John, and I'm so glad you made that point. The thing with this is it provides some cover for those really disgusting, views on migration and refugees and asylum seekers. It gives them something to hold in the faces of liberals and progressives to say, oh, well, if the UN High Commissioner on Refugees says this and the other, well, then we can't be that wrong, can we? So I worry that that's a danger when you put things in these terms where you say, oh, it's acceptable to an extent. What extent? That's where the danger is.
So I mean, I don't know how much else you talked about with this particular official, but like, what does he believe that these refugees should do? And do we have an idea? Are there states that are still acknowledging that particular crisis and working to help some of these many millions of people, as you pointed out? What's their status right now?
Well, I'll put it this way. We had 3 other guests in 2 other locations on the Dear World live show on refugees. One of them was Dr. Jamila, who is based in Europe's largest refugee camp in Lesbos, Greece. And the other were 2 young aid workers out in Cox's Bazar, who were themselves Rohingya refugees who had come into Bangladesh in Asia's largest refugee sort of settlement. And they both were talking about the same things. And it was really strange being in this situation as a journalist where you have a high commissioner, you have someone who has great resources, great power, great responsibility, in contact almost with people who are in need of that help and in the service of those people. What I found really telling was the way that Dr. Jamila and our 2 friends in Cox's Bazar were talking about very specific needs, right? How do you get clean water into a camp with tens of thousands of people? How can you ensure a 6 feet distance between everyone? It's not physically possible. And it was just like this butting of heads, John, between our most idealistic hopes and desires in the form of what High Commissioner Grandi was saying and what the reality on the ground is. There's a vast cavernous difference between the experiences of refugees and what we hope we can give them. And let's be honest, goodwill is not exactly at the forefront of everyone's mind. Every nation on earth, be it the United States, the United Kingdom, or Afghanistan, where I'm from, which is battling its own, ferocious coronavirus pandemic, there's not money to go around. Indeed, with Mr. Trump's administration taking away funding to the World Health Organization, you have to wonder, where do refugees come when it comes to the divvying out of resources, money, funds, and generosity?
Well, we have to wonder. I doubt he's doing much wondering around that. And it is convenient that many of the same communities inside of the United States and around the world that are going to be most hurt by this pandemic, the pandemic itself is being used as an excuse to not help those communities. That, internationally, refugees are going to be decimated. Well, we've got a problem, so we can't worry about refugees right now. People who live in urban areas, the environmental pollution is making them more susceptible to coronavirus. So also screw them. We're going to push through new changes to regulation through the EPA during this. And so it's just a doubling down on all of the things that made us so vulnerable to this. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.